The sun was beating down over the dry grasslands as Michael walked the familiar patrol route. He had been a ranger for over 15 years, but every day carried its own surprises. With his hat in one hand and his radio clipped at his belt, he scanned the horizon, expecting the usual: grazing deer, a lone coyote, perhaps the rustle of a wild turkey in the brush. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. Less than 20 yards ahead, a lynx stood tall on its hind legs. Michael froze, convinced at first that his eyes were playing tricks on him. The animal's tufted ears pointed skyward, its golden eyes locked on his. Instead of bolting back into the trees, the lynx stood its ground, front paws raised like it was trying to get his attention. Michael whispered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." The air felt heavier now. He knew wildcats avoided humans whenever possible. For one to step into the open and face him like this, it wasn't normal. The ranger tightened his grip on the hat in his hand, ready for anything. He had been trained to respect boundaries, to keep wildlife wild. But the lynx wasn't threatening. It was desperate. Michael took a cautious step forward. The lynx shifted, lowering to all fours, pacing twice in a tight circle, then looking back at him as if waiting. Then it padded a few steps toward the line of trees, stopped, and turned its head again. Michael knew that behavior. He had seen it in dogs leading someone to danger or to safety. His instincts wrestled inside him. Following a predator into the woods was risky, but something in the lynx's posture, the way it refused to vanish, gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the animal wasn't there for itself. It wanted him to come. Michael pulled out his radio, pressed the button, and said quietly, "This is Ranger Dalton. I've got a lynx showing strange behavior near the East Range." Proceeding with caution. Static crackled back, followed by a colleague's voice. "Copy that, Mike. You sure you want to get close?" He hesitated, eyes locked on the lynx. "I don't think I've got a choice." He clipped the radio back, heart pounding as he adjusted the strap of his pack. The lynx was already moving, slow but deliberate, stopping every few yards to make sure he followed. With every step Michael took, the tall grass whispered around his boots. The distance between them never grew larger. The lynx wanted him close. Michael's mind ran through possibilities. Was it injured? Was there a den nearby? Or worse, was he walking into a dangerous situation with a cornered animal? His training screamed caution, but his gut told him this was different. There was intent here, a message he couldn't ignore. The ranger stopped once more, gave the open field behind him a long look, then sighed. "All right, buddy," he muttered. "I'm coming." He tightened the strap on his pack, squared his shoulders, and stepped off the open trail, following the lynx into the waiting shadows of the trees. The forest swallowed the sound of Michael's boots as he followed the lynx deeper into the trees. Sunlight broke through in fractured beams, but the canopy quickly thickened, muting the open sky behind him. The lynx stayed just ahead, moving silently, glancing back often to ensure he kept pace. Michael's pulse was steady but heavy. He knew this wasn't a casual detour. They reached a dense thicket, and that's when he heard it, a low, muffled cry. It wasn't the call of a bird or the rustle of prey. It was sharp, pained, and raw. Michael froze, straining to pinpoint the sound. The male lynx stopped too, ears twitching, then crouched low and pushed forward through the undergrowth. Michael parted the branches with his gloved hands, heart tightening at what he saw. A second lynx lay trapped, her front paw clamped in a rusted steel trap. She struggled weakly, her body trembling from exhaustion, her eyes glassy with fear and pain. The cruel jaws of the trap had cut deep into the flesh, formatted with blood. "Damn poachers," Michael hissed, dropping to his knees. The male lynx growled low, pacing beside the injured female, torn between protecting her and letting the human help. Michael knew the risk. One wrong move, and those claws could tear him apart. He slowly unstrapped his pack, speaking softly, not to the animal, but to steady himself. "It's all right, girl. I'm here now." He scanned the trap. Old model, spring-loaded, designed for small predators. Illegal in these parts for over a decade, but clearly left to rot by someone who didn't care what it caught. Michael reached for the small crowbar he carried, but the tool wasn't nearly enough. He would need proper cutters, gloves reinforced for handling steel, maybe even tranquilizers to calm the lynx. And he had none of those with him. He grabbed his radio. "Base, this is Dalton. I've located an injured lynx in a steel trap about a mile east of Checkpoint 3. I need veterinary support immediately. Send Dr. Harris. Static filled the line before the dispatcher answered. Copy that, Michael. Hold position. Harris is on her way. ETA, 3 hours. Michael closed his eyes briefly. 3 hours was an eternity for an animal losing blood. The male lynx growled again, pacing tighter circles, tail lashing. Michael kept his body low, movements measured. He positioned himself just close enough to examine the injury. The female whimpered, tugging weakly against the trap, then collapsed onto her side. Panic surged through Michael. If she lost too much strength before help arrived, it might be too late. He placed one hand gently on the ground, inching forward, whispering steadily. Stay with me, girl. I'm not going to hurt you. The male lynx barked a short, sharp sound, half warning, half plea. Michael lifted his eyes to meet its gaze. The animal's chest heaved, muscles taut with tension, but it didn't strike. It just stood there, eyes burning into his, demanding action. Michael took a deep breath and weighed his options. If he tried to free her now, without proper tools, he could make the wound worse, or end up mauled. If he did nothing, she might not last until Harris arrived. He pressed the radio again, voice firm. Dispatch, tell Harris to bring sedation. And bring bolt cutters. The trap is tight. I'll do what I can in the meantime, but she needs speed. He set the radio aside, hands trembling slightly as he reached toward the trap. The male lynx growled, muscles bunching, but Michael didn't flinch. He needed to show the animal he wasn't a threat. Easy, Michael said, keeping his voice calm. I'm going to stay right here until help comes. You hear me? I won't leave her. The forest was silent except for the strained breathing of the injured lynx and the heavy panting of her mate. Michael knew the hardest part had just begun, keeping two desperate animals calm long enough for salvation to arrive. Michael set his pack down carefully on the dirt, keeping his eyes on the restless male lynx. The animal paced just a few feet away, low growls rumbling in its throat. Michael could feel the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. 3 hours until Harris arrived. That was too long. The female's breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering. If he didn't act, she wouldn't make it. He opened the pack, laying out what little he had. The short crowbar, a pair of pliers, his hunting knife, and a roll of gauze meant for human first aid. None of it was meant for this. He cursed under his breath, then steadied his hands. He had improvised before in the field, but never with a wild predator hovering over him, daring him to fail. Michael shifted slowly toward the trap. The female whimpered as the steel dug deeper when she moved. Easy, girl, he murmured. He glanced at the male, who stopped pacing long enough to fix him with a piercing stare. I'm helping her, Michael said aloud, his tone firm, calm. He needed the animal to hear his voice and know his intent. He crouched beside the trap, studying the mechanics. The springs were rusted but still powerful. With proper cutters, he could snap it open in seconds. Instead, he would have to use leverage and luck. He slid the crowbar into place, braced it against a rock, and pressed down with all his weight. The metal groaned, but barely shifted. Sweat ran down his back. He tried again, adjusting the angle, teeth clenched. The female cried out sharply, jerking her leg. The male snarled, stepping closer. Michael froze, heart hammering. He kept his eyes low, body language submissive, voice steady. It's all right. I've got her. Just give me a little more time. The lynx's growl tapered off into a low rumble. Michael took it as permission and went back to the trap. He gritted his teeth and pressed harder, the muscles in his arms burning. Slowly, painfully, the jaws began to part. Not enough yet, but progress. He slipped the pliers into the opening, forcing the steel wider. His hands shook with strain. Finally, the trap loosened enough for the paw to slide free. The female collapsed, dragging her leg close to her chest. Blood oozed from the wound, thick and dark. Michael immediately tore strips from the gauze, pressing them to the gash, trying to stanch the bleeding. His hands worked quickly, almost automatically, but his mind raced. Infection was a real danger. If bacteria had already set in, she would need antibiotics, something he didn't carry. The male lynx crouched beside them now, nose brushing against the injured female's head. The sound he made was not a growl, but a mournful whine. Michael felt the weight of that trust pressing down on him. They had let him close, let him touch her. Now it was up to him to keep her alive long enough for Harris to take over. He wrapped the makeshift bandage tight, murmuring constantly to keep both animals calm. "Stay with me, girl. Don't give up. Help's coming. Just hold on." The bleeding slowed, but her breathing was weak, every inhale shallow and fragile. Michael sat back on his heels, exhausted but alert. He had done what he could. Now he needed to keep them both calm until Harris arrived. The male lynx licked the female's face, then lifted his eyes to Michael. For a long moment, neither moved. It was a silent acknowledgement, a fragile bond formed in the middle of desperation. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But relief was short-lived. The female's chest hitched, her body trembling. She was slipping. Michael pressed the radio again. "Dispatch, tell Harris to step on it. She's fading fast." The forest was quiet again, too quiet. Michael sat in the dirt, one hand steady on the bandage, the other near his pack, every muscle tight with resolve. The trap was gone, but the fight was far from over. The drive back to the rehabilitation center was tense. Michael sat in the rear of the truck, keeping pressure on the lynx's injured paw while Dr. Harris monitored her breathing. The female barely stirred, her body limp from exhaustion and blood loss. The male followed for a while at a distance, shadowing the vehicle until the forest thinned. Even then, Michael knew he wasn't gone. He was waiting. At the center, the staff rushed into action. Harris barked instructions as the team lifted the lynx onto the exam table. "Saline flush, antibiotics ready. We'll need to prep for possible surgery." Michael stepped back but stayed close, unwilling to leave the room. He had seen injured wildlife before, but this was different. The bond he had felt in the forest clung to him. He couldn't shake the image of the male's eyes, burning with trust and demand all at once. The procedure was grueling. Harris and her team worked for over an hour, carefully cleaning the wound, flushing out dirt and rust. The steel jaws had torn deep, nearly to the bone. Infection had already begun to spread. One technician whispered the question that hung in the air. Would they have to amputate? "Not yet," Harris said firmly. "She still has circulation. We give her a chance." Michael exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath. He watched as they stitched torn flesh, bandaged the leg, and hooked the lynx to fluids. When it was finally over, she was wheeled into recovery, her sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. Over the next days, Michael returned to the center every morning. He found himself walking the perimeter first, because the male lynx was always nearby. At dawn, the cat would appear in the trees beyond the fence, pacing, sitting, waiting. He never came closer than the edge of the property, but his presence was constant. Michael stood there sometimes, just watching him, the unspoken connection as real as anything he had ever known. Inside, the female's condition wavered. Some days her breathing was stronger, her eyes clearer. Other days she lay still, her body weak from the infection they were fighting with heavy doses of antibiotics. Harris remained cautious. "We've bought her time," she told Michael one evening. "But if the tissue keeps breaking down, we may lose the leg. And if we lose the leg, she may not survive in the wild." That reality sat like a stone in Michael's chest. He knew what it meant. A lynx without 4 strong legs couldn't hunt properly. She would be doomed to captivity or worse. On the 5th night, Michael was walking out when he saw the male again at the fence line. He stopped, gripping the railing, staring across the darkened yard. The lynx's silhouette was still, silent. For reasons he couldn't explain, Michael spoke aloud. "She's fighting. We're doing everything we can. Don't give up on her yet." The lynx tilted his head slightly, then vanished into the trees. Michael stood there long after, the night pressing in around him, wondering if the animal understood. By the end of the week, Harris called him in. "She's stable, but it's still uncertain. We need to see how the leg heals before we make any decisions." Michael nodded, though his heart sank. He walked down the hall to where the lynx lay in her recovery pen. She lifted her head weakly, eyes finding him. He crouched low, resting a hand on the chain-link divider. "You've made it this far. Just a little longer." The hum of machines filled the silence. Outside, in the distance, Michael thought he heard that low, familiar growl, the sound of the male lynx keeping vigil. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The drive back to the rehabilitation center was tense and drawn out. Every bump in the dirt road made Michael wince, afraid the jolt would worsen the lynx's injury. He sat in the rear of the truck, keeping pressure on her wounded paw, while Dr. Harris leaned close with a stethoscope, listening for any sign of weakness in her breathing. The female barely stirred, her body limp from exhaustion and blood loss. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, each movement fragile, as if she were clinging to life by a thread. Through the rear window, Michael caught glimpses of the male lynx shadowing them, his form weaving in and out of the trees. He kept his distance, but Michael could feel the animal's determination. Even when the forest began to thin, he knew the male wasn't gone. He was waiting. At the center, the staff rushed forward before the vehicle even stopped. A stretcher was pulled out, and Harris barked instructions as the team lifted the lynx onto the exam table. The room filled with motion, hands gloved, tools clattering into trays, bright lights snapping on. Saline flush, antibiotics ready. We'll need to prep for possible surgery. Keep oxygen on standby, Harris commanded. The intensity was overwhelming, yet Michael stayed, unwilling to leave her side. He had seen animals treated before, but never one that seemed tied to him in such a strange, unspoken way. The memory of the male's eyes, pleading, burning with urgency, was branded into his mind. The procedure stretched on and on. Harris and her team worked for over an hour, carefully cleaning the wound, flushing out dirt, rust, and bits of torn fur. The steel jaws had crushed deeper than Michael realized, nearly to the bone. Infection was already advancing. A hushed voice from one technician cut through the tension. Will we have to amputate? The question hung heavy, a possibility no one wanted to face. Harris's reply was firm and clipped. Not yet. She still has circulation. We give her a chance. Michael exhaled, realizing his fists were clenched wide at his sides. He forced himself to breathe as they stitched torn flesh, wrapped the leg in thick bandages, and hooked the lynx to 4 fluids. When it was finally over, she was wheeled into recovery. Her sides lifted and fell, shallow but steady, the faint rhythm like a fragile promise. The days that followed blurred together. Each morning Michael returned before sunrise, unable to shake his responsibility. He found himself pacing the perimeter before entering, because the male lynx was always there. At dawn, the cat would emerge from the shadows, sitting or pacing at the tree line beyond the fence. He never ventured closer, never showed aggression, but his presence was constant, haunting. Michael often stood quietly, watching the animal's silhouette against the rising sun, feeling a bond he could never explain. Inside, the female's condition wavered like a pendulum. Some days her breathing was stronger, her eyes alert. Other days, she barely moved, her body drained by the infection they battled with high doses of antibiotics. Harris remained cautious, never allowing hope to run unchecked. We've bought her time, she told Michael one evening after checking her vitals. But if the tissue keeps breaking down, we may lose the leg. And if we lose the leg, she won't survive out there. The words hit Michael like a weight dropped onto his chest. A lynx without 4 strong legs couldn't hunt, couldn't climb, couldn't live as she was meant to. The wild would not forgive such weakness. On the 5th night, Michael walked out under a sky painted deep indigo. He froze when he saw the male at the fence line again. This time he was closer, a dark silhouette against the faint moonlight. Michael gripped the railing, staring across the yard. The lynx was still, silent, only the faint gleam of his eyes betraying his presence. Against all reason, Michael spoke aloud. She's fighting. We're doing everything we can. Don't give up on her yet. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion he had held back. The lynx tilted his head, ears flicking, then disappeared into the trees. Michael stood there long after, the cool night pressing against his skin, wondering if the animal understood, or maybe just hoping he did. By the end of the week, Harris called him into her office. She's stable, but it's still uncertain, she said, rubbing her tired eyes. We need to see how the leg heals before we make any decisions. If she can bear weight without pain, she'll have a future out there. If not, she let the thought trail off. Michael only nodded, though inside his stomach twisted with dread. He walked down the hall, each step heavy, until he reached the recovery pen. The lynx lay curled on the padded floor, her bandaged legs stretched awkwardly in front of her. When she lifted her head weakly and her eyes met his, Michael crouched low, resting his hand on the chain-link divider. You've made it this far. Just a little longer. Don't stop now. His words were soft, but they carried every ounce of conviction he had left. The hum of machines filled the silence. Outside, Faint and distant, Michael thought he heard the low, familiar growl, the patient vigil of the male lynx. It sent a shiver down his spine, a reminder that the fight wasn't over. Not yet.